Okay, so I'm going to make an assumption, which I hopefully is a reasonable one, and that is that most attendees, most people dialing in or watching this webinar in their own time are related to events. They're either event organizers, event planners, and they have a fairly good understanding of the challenges of the events industry, whether they're running meetings, conferences, exhibitions, incentive travel, etc. What the diagram shows is the event's life cycle, and I'm just going to walk through it. And on the diagram are the 7 tools that Mike mentioned as part of the Event Tech Tribe. What I will say is, although I'm going to refer to them, whatever I'm presenting now is generic, so it applies to any tool. So you may be using one or none of the tools on the screen. You may be using other tools. You may be using half a dozen others. You might be using a single tool to do the same thing. But the principle we're going to talk about is personal data. Okay, and with GDPR, as we all, hopefully we all know, is all about personal data and accountability. So if you're the event organizer who understands the event's life cycle, has to run events and exhibitions through the event's life cycle, you need to understand what personal data you hold and what you can and can't do with it, and the fact that you are accountable for the personal data you hold. Okay, so briefly, well, just before I look at the life cycle, very simple question: what is personal data? Now, there's a big long list of fields, but all I'm going to mention to you is name and email address. Okay, so in its most basic form, if you have the name and email address of a delegate who attends an event, but also of a supplier or a client. So if you're a third party or an agency and you organize events on behalf of clients, then you will have client contact details. You may have partner details. You may have contractors. You'll have the name, email address. You may have agency staff, etc. Okay, so if you hold any of that information, that is personal data, and that is regardless of whether it's their Gmail account or their business account. So even business account falls under personal data as far as GDPR is concerned. So if you're an event organizer and you manage events, so you may start with the sourcing process. You may use Meeting Select, you may use others to source a venue. It's likely that you'll have supplier personal data, and if you're an agent, you may have client personal data as well. If you use a system like Hub or EventSop for the planning and the management of the event, it's likely you'll have exhibitor data, supply data, speaker data on those systems, and you are the person who are controlling and managing that data, so you're accountable for that data. Every event we know needs registration, so you may be using Swoogo or others. And of course, we know that's the big one, the one which we can all recognize, and that is on the registration, you capture delegate data or attendee data, depending on where in the world you are. On site, you can use tools like Glisser, as Mike has already explained, or you may be using execution tools like TRC, which are used for lead retrieval and badging. Again, there's a lot of personal data involved there. And you may be using a tool like Insights XM, which may or may not use personal data, depending on what it's used for. So that's basically for analytics post the event. Okay, so as I mentioned, these are some tools which you'd use in the events life cycle. Of course, there can be others that may be used. And you may be a corporate using those tools yourselves directly, or you may be an agency using them on behalf of your client.